I'm tired. Exhausted even. Yeah, I'm exhausted. I've done enough, haven't I?
Jujutsu Kaisen has a lot of characters who fight for grand reasons. Yuji wants to save people. Gojo wants to change the system. Megumi's searching for meaning. And then, there's Nanami. He looks less like a sorcerer and more like a guy who got lost on his way to a corporate merger. While everyone else is screaming about ideals, Nanami is just checking his watch. The tragedy of his character isn't that he fights curses. It's that he treats exorcising demons with the same enthusiasm as filing a tax return. He's not passionate about jujutsu sorcery. He's not driven by some heroic purpose. He's just doing his job. Because someone has to. Because the alternative is worse. Nanami is the embodiment of existential exhaustion. A man who's seen too much to believe in anything, but keeps showing up anyway because not showing up would mean letting others suffer. And in the end, he works himself to death. Literally. Half his body burned off, missing an eye, barely standing. And he keeps going, keeps fighting, until there's nothing left. To understand Nanami, you have to understand Haibara, Yu Haibara, his classmate at Jujutsu High. Bright kid, optimistic, the kind of person who genuinely believed sorcerers made a difference. They went on a mission together when they were second years. Standard assignment, exorcise a grade 2 curse. Routine work. Except the curse was misgraded. It was actually grade 1, and Haibara died, torn apart because the higher-ups made a clerical error, because someone didn't do their job properly, because in the world of jujutsu sorcery, incompetence kills. Watch Nanami's face when it happens. There's no dramatic breakdown, no screaming, just emptiness, like something inside him shut off permanently. Trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it just goes quiet. It doesn't make you angry. It just drains the color out of everything until you're simply tired. Haibara's death taught Nanami that the world isn't fair, that good people die for stupid reasons, and that the system he's part of is broken beyond repair. So he left, graduated and walked away from jujutsu sorcery entirely, became a salaryman, got a corporate job, tried to live like a normal person. For 4 years, Nanami tried to convince himself he'd made the right choice. He wore a different suit, worked in an office, dealt with quotas and meetings and performance reviews, instead of curses and death, and he hated every second of it. Not because the work was hard, but because it was meaningless. He was pushing numbers around a screen while people were dying, while curses were killing innocents, while kids like Haibara were being sent on missions with wrong information. It's a specific kind of rot. You're sitting in an air-conditioned office, safe, staring at spreadsheets, but in the back of your mind, you know you have the power to stop the bleeding outside. You chose comfort, but that safety doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like you're running away. Nanami's dream was simple: retire to Malaysia, Kuantan specifically, build a house on a beach, read all the books he never had time for, just exist, without responsibility, without the weight of other people's lives on his shoulders. But here's the trap. That dream was always in the future, always after I've saved enough money, or when I turn 35. It was an escape hatch that kept getting pushed further away, because deep down, Nanami knew something. You can't escape to a beach when you know the world is burning. You can't read peacefully when you remember the screams. The dream of Malaysia wasn't a plan. It was a fantasy, a place his mind could go when reality became unbearable. Then came the bakery, a simple interaction with a shopkeeper who had a faint curse on her shoulder. Nanami removed it. She thanked him, and that small thank you hit harder than any paycheck.
And speaking of gratitude, this video was born from a request by a subscriber. If you also feel we are delivering value here, leave your like and subscribe as your thank you. And if you want to see an analysis of another character that leaves a mark on you, comment their name below. I'm listening.
He picked up the phone and called Gojo. He didn't wait to be recruited. He didn't wait for a hero's call. He just called and said he was coming back. Not because he suddenly believed in the system, but because he realized that sitting in an office while people suffered was a burden he couldn't live with. Because sitting in an office while a kid like Yuji got sent out unprepared felt too much like what happened to Haibara.
This is the curse of being competent. Nanami didn't ask to be strong. He didn't ask to see curses. But once you know you can save someone, refusing to do it feels less like a choice and more like a crime. It wasn't passion that dragged him back. It was the guilt of being capable. Nanami didn't choose to be born with cursed energy, didn't choose to see curses, didn't choose to have the skills to fight them, but he has those things, and ignoring them means people die. So he came back, not out of passion, out of duty, and that's the weight he carried. Every day felt like working overtime on a shift that never ends. He wasn't fighting because he loved it, he was fighting because the alternative was unacceptable. Nanami's curse technique is perfect for who he is. ratio technique. He divides his target into tenths and creates a weak point at the 7:3 ratio. Precise, mathematical. Turn anything into a job that can be completed efficiently. It's not flashy, it's not overwhelming, it's just effective. Like everything about Nanami, think about his technique. It forces a weak point into existence. It imposes logic onto chaos. In a world where curses are grotesque and nonsensical, Nanami literally forces reality to follow a strict 7:3 rule. It's not just an attack, it's a desperate attempt to make the world make sense, to make the irrational rational, to turn horror into a task that can be completed and checked off a list. This is a coping mechanism. When reality is unbearable, you reduce it to numbers, to ratios, to problems that have solutions. And his obsession with work hours, refusing to fight past 6 p.m. unless he's in overtime. It sounds like a quirk, a gag, but it's survival. Because if he lets the job consume all his time, if he stops drawing boundaries between work and life, then he stops being a person. He becomes just a tool, a sorcerer, a weapon. And weapons don't get to dream about Malaysia. The strict schedule is his way of saying, I am still human. I still have a life outside this. I still have a self. Then Shibuya happened. The worst night in modern Jujutsu history. Gojo sealed, hundreds dead, curses running wild, and Nanami right in the center of it. He fights Shigamo, fights Dagon with Maki and Naobito, survives the endless swarm of Shikigami. Then Jogo shows up. In an instant, he burns them. Nanami is engulfed in flames, half his body scorched, his eye destroyed, flesh melting off, and he's still standing, still moving. At this point, the man is gone. Only the habit remains. His body is failing, literally burning away, but his legs keep moving because they don't know how to stop. It's terrifying because it's not resilience anymore. It's machinery. Moving because movement is the only thing left. Fighting because stopping means accepting what's happening to him. And what's he thinking about? Not the pain, not the fear. He's worried about Megumi, about Maki, about Naobito, about whether they're okay, because that's who Nanami is. Even when he's dying, he's still working, still trying to minimize damage, still trying to protect the people who might survive. This is what happens when your entire sense of worth is tied to usefulness. You can't stop, because stopping means admitting you're no longer serving a purpose. And if you're not useful, what are you? He encounters a swarm of transfigured humans, mindless things that used to be people, and with a blunt, shattered sword and a body that's falling apart, he cuts through them. Not because he thinks he can win, but because that's what sorcerers do. Then he asks himself, I've done enough, haven't I? That question breaks my heart, because the answer is obvious. Yes, Nanami has done more than enough. He came back when he didn't have to, mentored Yuji, fought battles that weren't his responsibility, sacrificed his dream of peace over and over and over. But he can't accept that answer, because accepting it means stopping, and stopping feels like giving up. Then his mind breaks, not from weakness, from mercy. His consciousness does what it's been trained to do in unbearable situations. It escapes. And where does it go? Malaysia, Kuantan, the beach he never got to see, the books he never got to read, the sun on his skin, the sound of waves. It's not madness, it's mercy. His brain pulls the emergency brake. Reality is too cruel to look at, so his mind gives him the one thing life never did, a vacation. Nanami's body is in Shibuya, burning and broken, but his mind is on that beach, finally at peace, finally resting.
Then Haibara appears, not as a ghost, as a memory, a reminder, and he points to Yuji entering the station, and Nanami understands. His job isn't finished. There's one last thing he has to do. Mahito asks if they should chat, catch up. They go way back after all, and Nanami doesn't respond, because he's not talking to Mahito, he's talking to Haibara. He says he came back to sorcery with just a vague reason it was worthwhile, asks what he was trying to do, and Haibara points him to Yuji. This is Nanami's final realization. He didn't come back for himself. He came back to make sure the next generation wouldn't end up like Haibara, wouldn't die because someone didn't prepare them properly. So he looks at Yuji, this kid who's been through hell, who's carrying Sukuna, who's seen so much death already. And Nanami knows he can't protect him anymore, can't guide him, can't be there. But he can do one thing. He can choose his last words carefully, because dying sorcerers can curse the living with their final thoughts. And Nanami refuses to burden Yuji with guilt or expectation or anything that might break him. So he smiles and says, "You've got it from here. Not avenge me, not finish the mission, just, you've got this. Trust, permission to keep going, freedom from the weight Nanami carried his whole life." And then Mahito kills him, destroys him completely, and Nanami dies on that beach in his mind, finally resting, finally free from the overtime shift that never ended.
Nanami's death is one of the most brutal in the series, not just because of how it happens, but because of what it represents. Here's a man who did everything right, came back to help, mentored the next generation, fought until there was nothing left, and his reward was burning to death in a subway station. This is the reality Nanami understood from the beginning, that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a good ending, that sacrifice isn't always noble or meaningful. Sometimes it's just painful, and you do it anyway because the alternative is letting others carry a burden you know you can bear. But here's what Nanami's story teaches us. About duty, about exhaustion, about the weight of knowing you could help and choosing whether or not to carry that weight. Nanami represents something we don't talk about enough. Burnout as a form of heroism. The people who keep showing up not because they're passionate, but because they're responsible. Who are exhausted to their core but can't stop because stopping means people suffer. It reminds me of Camus and the Myth of Sisyphus, pushing the boulder up the hill, watching it roll down, and doing it again. Most people would give up. Nanami kept pushing the boulder not because he thought it would stay at the top, but because pushing was the only way to keep the people behind him safe. Not because the task has meaning, but because he chooses to keep pushing anyway. Nanami was Sisyphus. He knew the boulder would always roll back, knew he'd never reach Malaysia, knew the work would never end, but he kept pushing. Not because it would lead somewhere, but because that's what it means to be human in an absurd world. His final question, "I've done enough, haven't I?" is the question every exhausted person asks themselves. Every caregiver who's given everything. Every person working themselves to the bone for a cause that never seems to get better. And the tragedy is that the answer doesn't matter. Nanami would have kept going either way, because that's who he was. Nanami Kento never made it to Malaysia, never read those books, never got to rest. He worked himself to death, literally. Gave everything until there was nothing left to give. And maybe that's the most honest depiction of adulthood in anime. That sometimes, life isn't about grand purpose or passionate callings. Sometimes, it's about showing up to a job you hate because people are counting on you. About carrying weight you never asked for, because putting it down means watching others suffer. Nanami deserved better, deserved that beach, deserved peace, but he chose responsibility instead. And that choice, repeated every single day until his last breath, is what made him a hero.